Welcome to the Women in Transport podcast. I'm your host, Shireen Ali Khan, and this is season 2, where we are covering everything intersectionality. We're looking at the layers that make us who we are. We're looking at privilege, looking at oppression, and really what makes us human. Okay, so we're joining today for National Inclusion Week, and I've got loads of really great guests on this episode who have really varied relationships with women in transport. So hopefully this will come out in the conversations. And really, I just want to get people's opinions. Like we hear these terms all the time. We kind of know what it means, but often we don't. So I want to kind of get into the nitty gritty of that today. So if we go around the table, please introduce yourselves, your role, and really like your role in actually promoting EDI. We talk about all of this, but what is it you're doing personally with your organisation as well to really kind of further that agenda? So Laura, I'll come to you first.
Hi, so I'm Laura Roche. I work for SCS Railways. We are a joint venture delivering part of the project in London for HS2. I have worked here for over 4 years in the space of quality, diversity and inclusion. So I now head up more the kind of the area of social sustainability and legacy, but EDI still sits within that. And my role is very much looking at the ambitions of HS2 as a client around how we leave that legacy in our local communities, a diverse workforce for the industry, and then also what are our ambitions as a project and for our parent companies as well. So I lead on our quality, diversity and inclusion strategy, and just really trying to push the barriers of what we've done. We are quite behind in comparison to other industries, and it's a really exciting space to work in, to do things for the first time.
Yeah, I really love that sense of you're creating change as well as delivery at the same time, because we want to set the foundations for other projects and say this is what good EDI looks like, but you're also having to deliver stuff as well. So really, really, really interesting. And we've worked together in lots of different ways, and it's great to see the impact of the work being delivered. Thank you so much and welcome. And Jo, I'll come to you, please.
Hi, yes. So I'm Joanna Hill, Communications Engagement Specialist and also volunteer Northwest Regional Lead for Women in Transport. Typically, as a communications specialist, my aim really is to create safe spaces where people can learn about EDI issues, discover some new perspectives, and be that credible source of information. I'm responsible for making sure any comms and events are representative, they're inclusive, and the messaging is really sensitive, to different sort of issues. It's also really important now to sort of scrutinize and moderate content, because there is so many instances of misinformation, fake news, that kind of thing. So we have to maintain that credibility, the trustworthiness, and the objectivity as well. So those are the areas that I really work in.
Yeah, really huge stuff. I love that idea around having to fact check, because it's so on the agenda at the moment, where you just see stuff on social media and you think, well, that must be true because I've read it. And there are huge risks and implications around that. So I'd love to hear more about some of the current things that you're working on and how that really ties in. And Iain, come to you, Iain Smith.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Iain. I do some work with women in transport, which I love doing because I'm a fat, white, middle-class, straight, able-bodied cis bloke. So I fit in the hot crosshairs really of every piece of privilege there is. I deliver lead with the most excellent colleague, Shireen, and I try my hardest to be the best ally that I can be. And that means I learn lots all the time. And I'm interested that National Inclusion Week, it's about celebrating, but it's also about action. And I think it's important to try and think through how we can take action every week, not just during the week.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Iain. And we have such conversations around just the world, what's happening, where it's going. We're always in that space of learning. And I think Women in Transport really brings together people who just are always up for learning stuff. And I know I always laugh when you talk about the privileges, but I think it's so great to be able to acknowledge the privilege that all of us have, and even to be able to have this conversation. So yeah, really, thank you so much for that. Wonderful. So now I'd like to move on a little bit to, in that space of action, as Iain quite rightly said, actually, what is it that we are actually doing? So, Jo, I'll come to you first, and then I'll come to Laura and to Iain. But what are some of the current things that you're working on, those initiatives that you're doing both personally and professionally?
For me, it's often about having conversations. So I have a lot of conversations, funnily enough, with my parents, who sort of, they have different perspectives to me. They have different upbringing and experiences. So it's about kind of debunking some of the jargon, I think, or explaining some of the jargon, particularly around different sort of genders and things like that. It can be a little bit challenging to sort of wrap your head around and keep up with, and why that's a thing. And in terms of sort of professional, again, it kind of carries on into it, really. I work a lot in kind of creating almost like fact sheets, information sheets to make some of the information more accessible, helping people to tap into what those themes are and how it actually applies to them. So working in sort of the menopause space, how do we bring, fathers, brothers, husbands into that conversation, that sort of thing. I'm also building a relationship with Women in Transport and the FUR programme from the Sustainability School. I'm a bronze level FUR ambassador with the programme, and part of that comes with that kind of spreading the word, as it were. So I've been sharing resources sort of both ways. So stuff that Women in Transport has been doing, the Equity Index and the white paper around the motherhood penalty, which are now resources on the school, and also bringing their resources back into Women in Transport as well, just to drive that change, really, and promote action. As Iain mentioned earlier, it's about, understanding the small steps that you can take individually and also as your organisation to bring about that more inclusive workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the way you put it around is those small steps. It's about, sometimes it's, radical change is needed, but actually it's small steps that get us to that change. And I really love that you talk about sharing resources, but mostly it's about having the conversation. It's about creating that safe space in order to lean into these things that are ever changing. And, how do you do that but without taking people on the journey with you? Laura, to you, please.
I feel like I have so much to say that I want to keep it quite practical for people, because I think if I was listening to this, I would want to know, what can I do? And so I think on a personal level, to kind of reiterate what Iain said, I think I'm incredibly aware of my privilege in this space. I think in an EDI role, it can be quite intimidating to come up with, what is your story? What is the reason that you're in this space? And actually, I am privileged in a lot of ways. I'm very, I've had amazing education, and from that I've had the opportunity to spend time studying this stuff, which is in itself quite a privilege. And so I take that into these spaces. I think in an industry where actually you really have to adjust your communication style, you have to adjust your arguments and your justifications, because what you think is so important doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone because it doesn't directly benefit them. And so you have to talk about things in different ways. And so that's something I guess I do on a day-to-day basis, is I have weird conversations, and I try to come to work with an open mind and not judge people, but be curious about why they're coming at it from that angle. And then I go home and into my friendship groups and I can take a different approach, and I really enjoy that. On a professional level, there is so much that I would love to share, but I think, again, trying to keep it practical. Two of the things that we do and that we've launched actually during National Inclusion Week, because every year we celebrate National Inclusion Week and we try to have spaces for people to talk, but also something that we're launching as almost like a product that is going to benefit employees. And so we've launched our EDI Champions program, which, again, to kind of go back to what both Joanna and Iain have said, is about accessing different voices. So if I go to my senior leadership team, I'm not going to get as much diversity as if I go out and get a cross section of the project. And so it's a 2-day course open to everybody. It's voluntary. And we've got over 85 people trained. And on that course, you learn about things like psychological safety, active bystander training. What is your why? Which I know we've done in different spaces as well. But if you really want people to care about this, it's about digging into, why would this matter to me? What impact will it have on me if this is better for everyone? So that program I absolutely love. And I think, being able to offer your employees some form of educational training is brilliant. And it doesn't have to be boring. It can be really super interactive. And the second one is disability confidence. So again, anyone listening to this that thinks, I just want my business to do something that puts us in the right direction. Disability Confident is a free government scheme. It has 3 levels. So you can it offers the opportunity to tell potential employees and your current employees that you are committed to disability inclusion. You want your processes to be more inclusive. You are willing to be audited on it. We've had Network Rail audit us over the years. And so it's such a learning opportunity as well. You're not going to get told off. You're just going to be pushed in the right direction. And I think that focus on neurodiversity as well, potentially for National Inclusion Week, if that's a space that people want to explore, it's so important at the moment. So just 2 things I would share for now.
what I would take away from what you've just described is just really how important lived experience is, because you've acknowledged it yourself, where you maybe come from a position of privilege, and yes, you've studied the topics and you understand them from that academic perspective, and you can maybe apply some change management in order to kind of shift the dial. But actually, lived experience is so important to understand the nuances that make us human beings. And I know that's why you're involved in the intersectionality piece, is really understanding that no two people are the same, and we can't possibly assume somebody else's story based on even the snippet that we know of them. But by creating those safe spaces, you enable people to bring themselves and actually share some of those life traumas. And life at the best of times is traumatic. That is, life is a journey. And actually being able to support people in all of those stages, whatever they look like, good and bad, I think is so important. We know the business case behind all of this already. I won't reiterate. I think our learners, our listeners, if they want to know, they can Google the kind of business benefits. But we know the basic is that the more diverse people you have around you, the better your team will operate. But how do you, promote and really harness and enable that diversity to stay with you? And for me, all of that's around lived experience. And certainly that's what we're doing with Women in Transport, and the intersectionality piece is promoting those different lived experiences in a way that I've not seen elsewhere. Iain, I'd like to come to you now about some of the stuff that you're doing. This might be a good opportunity to speak about LEAD and how we're trying to make LEAD really diverse in all aspects as well. So just really, open platform for you.
Yeah, so I think that Women in Transport started really on the gender space, and that's what it says on the tin. But I think over the last couple of years, we've developed, actually often with your leadership, Shireen, into new spaces. And I think that's really helpful. So the Women in Transport LEAD program is intended to help people think through what it is they can control. And once you're in that place of, I can control some stuff, then what do I want to do with that control? What do I want to achieve within the context of my life? And then how can I build towards that? How can I grow my confidence, my influence, my leadership style, my network, my presence, how people see me? Carefully avoiding the word brand. I've become allergic to that recently, but that sort of stuff. And this is true for women, but it's also true for all people, really, but absolutely all people in that intersectionality space. So I'm really excited about that program and the feedback we get and how that has made a difference. But we do need to reach out further and make sure that program is more diverse, because, of course, what we learn from a more diverse audience is all the things that diverse audience brings in terms of context. And so over and above that, I find myself in a number of different organizations at any point in time. And I try and do that thing of being the change that I want to see. So if someone says something a bit silly, I don't think they'll mean anything bad by it, but I will, depending on the circumstances, gently call them out or take them to one side. I really believe that how people see the world is what affects their behavior. And so what we have to do is actually give people the time and space to explain why they see things in a particular way. So there is an opportunity to almost do that Nancy Klein thing that we use in the LEAD program is, well, what if that wasn't the case? And if you ask a number of times, what if that wasn't the case? Actually, people begin to think, well, maybe the assumptions that are underpinning any prejudice that I might have might not be based in facts. And the difficulty is, in 2024, as this podcast is being timed, I know this will be on Dave, and so people will be listening to this on 2028 and 2029. Of course, that's what's happening with great pieces of content. They get repeated. But in 2024, we're just awash with messaging that comes from an ill-informed space. And so that compounds the difficulties that we have. And I think challenging that all the time is something that I can absolutely do, and using that privilege for good purposes.
Oh, thank you, Iain. There's so much in that. And I love the work that we do with Women in Transport just in general, because I find that as a group, we're always in that space of innovation and just wanting to keep moving forward, try new things, just give it a go. And I think there's a real, something really special in a group of people who are just up for doing different things, because we see the greater good of it. And obviously everything has to, have, rigidity about it in the sense of process and stuff like that. But there's a real innovation from there. And certainly with LEAD, we see the difference it makes with people in real time. And so for me, having been on LEAD and then being, co-facilitator with you and program directing it, it's just a real sense of privilege, like having the conversations that we get to have. And to your point around, the way we call things out and call things in, I think the language, and Joe, this is to your point earlier around you having to be just kind of extra fact checking and being on it. The language is always changing. I'd like to come in around that. Like, how do you take people on that journey when they're not quite on it, not quite with it, but as a business, as an individual, we need to be in a different space. Like, Laura and Joe, what do you do to create that change?
I think for me, it starts at the top, which is great and also quite unfortunate because, depending on your leadership team, the willingness and the appetite and the understanding of the benefits can really vary. And often people can be personally invested, but if they're personally invested in one issue, for example, gender, they've got a story about the daughter or a wife or somebody close to them who has been disadvantaged, they'll be really passionate about that space. But then what you will find often is they will misstep in the other spaces. And so what you want is almost like an EDI education. You don't want to give a fact sheet. People are not going to know everything. They're not going to do everything right, but it's the intention and it's the understanding of impact. And so I think it's more about a skill set rather than a knowledge base. And so I try to go into spaces with that, which is you're not going to know everything about, for example, a trans person's experience or what it means to be neurodiverse in the workplace. But what you can be is, like I said earlier, curious and non-judgmental about the reasons why people behave the way they do, request the kind of support that they request. And it's a learning curve. I think it can take your whole career to get to a place where you feel, actually, I think I'm quite a good manager and I get this. And so I would start at the top because I think the behaviors and the commitment from the top is essential to actually have it embedded in the business in order to have a strategy that is properly supported. And that it's not an EDI strategy sitting out here by itself. It's embedded into your wellbeing strategy and your comms strategy and your commercial strategy. Ultimately, is it being funded in your workplace? Because that's where it starts. So yeah, I think number one, I would say it's coming at it from a senior leadership perspective and a strategic perspective. It's not a nice to have. Not anyone can do it. I think that's the other thing that I see quite a lot is, well, we can just give that to so-and-so. And it's like, actually, there is a skill set that sits behind it. So that's probably where I would advise people go. And I would also say there are so many resources out there that exist already. Don't start from scratch. Use the supply chain sustainability school, utilize women in transport. There are so many forums that you can use to get that good grounding and to offer your employees free training. Like, that's ultimately what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Joe, to you?
Yeah, not really much to add other than I try to just portray the behaviours I want to see in other people. If I'm feeling, because it can be quite a challenging space, sometimes you do feel a little bit overwhelmed, particularly if you feel like it's only you, or that, there are other business priorities that have taken, center stage, and it's not always funded the way you want it to be. So for me, yeah, it's all about the small steps. It's all about just portraying how I think people should be kinder, be more patient. And it's good practice for me as well, because I do have a tendency to run at 1,000,000 miles an hour and want everything to be, there. So sometimes it's about, okay, can I pull back my expectations? How can I help the business just take that next step? And sometimes it's being a little bit, not underhanded, but just kind of going under the surface, knowing when to, when to sort of speak up and fight the battle, and when actually you just need to take a step back and let the business do the right thing, because it will. Sometimes it just needs a real gentle push in the right direction.
Laura, so I'm going to come to you first. Can you share some kind of key successes of initiatives, either personally or through your organisation, that you've implemented and you've really kind of seen the benefit and some change occur?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick one that Shreen and I actually worked on together many years ago at this point. So when I first joined the project, we were in COVID. Literally 2 days after I started, and pretty quickly we wanted to dedicate some of our time and effort into supporting our employees in the local community with issues that they might be facing. So there was things like, obviously, a technology divide where some kids didn't have jobs. Was there a way that we could actually provide them? And one of the spaces that I spoke about was domestic abuse, and that we were already starting to see stories coming out about the increased rates of abuse as people were essentially stuck in their homes under pressure because some people were furloughed, their jobs were at risk, and just being in a really confined environment where victims who were experiencing abuse before the pandemic didn't have those regular, I suppose, escapes that they had previously, or the support networks that they had, as well as potentially people experiencing it for the first time. So initially it was a bit of a, where does this sit? Is this health and wellbeing? Is this EDI? Is this something we even want to go near? And that was some of the responses that we had, which was, if we start talking about this, does that mean we're kind of responsible? And they were tough conversations, because actually these are employees. We have a duty of care. And also, as much as domestic abuse can affect anyone, it predominantly affects women. It is a gendered issue, and it's predominantly at the hands of men. And Shireen and I had a lot of conversations about the fact that we work in an industry that is predominantly male. And so there was a sensitivity there around, we have a opportunity to support people that might be affected directly or indirectly. A loved one might be experiencing it. So we can provide guidance and knowledge, which I think is really powerful, signs to watch out for. But then also we could potentially raise awareness among perpetrators because we were aware that we may have a number in our workforce. So that was just such a journey to be on, to educate myself more in that space, to work with amazing organisations like the Hillingdon Women's Centre, the Employees Initiative on Domestic Abuse. There were all of these amazing experts popping up. And so that taught me in the EDI space to tap into the experts. So like I said earlier, I don't think I expect anyone I work with to be an expert in something, but actually that there are people that do this and that we should tap into them. And that the power of education and the stories, Shireen, to your point, that came out of that. We had so many men, particularly on site, who came and said, actually, I grew up in a household that experienced abuse and I want to do something about it. And so many people went out of their way to send photos of themselves holding up signs saying that they supported ending domestic abuse. So many people who went on our ambassador training. And I think it was a lesson in pushing the boundary because it's not something that construction had dealt with. It's not something a lot of industries have dealt with. Less than 5% of businesses have a domestic abuse policy. And so it was an opportunity to really lead the way and also educate myself about how to make change. So I would definitely hold that one quite high up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was such a weird kind of bubble of time to be in, but to know that you could have an impact. And I do remember somebody came forward and actually said as a result of that campaign, they'd made a change within their own personal circumstances. And for me, I always say, if we just help one person, you've done a thing. And I know there were many, many people like that, but that's always something that kind of really resonates with me, that came out of what was such a horrible time of COVID. Jo, to you, are there any stories that you'd like to share?
Yeah, Laura actually made me think about something. I was struggling a little bit with this one. Something I do a lot in my day job is raising awareness around mental health. As you mentioned, Laura, our industry is predominantly male, but that comes with the whole sort of toxic male kind of attitude that you just shut down, don't say anything. Really strong, can't talk about anything that's bothering me. So something that I do quite regularly in our communications to our employees is have a spotlight on different individuals who do some amazing things for mental health, either because they've experienced it themselves. We had an individual who was in the army, had a lot of trauma, came out the other side, and he volunteers with Rock to Recovery. And he does a lot of work with them because they helped him get back on his feet. So what we like to do is kind of normalize it, humanize it, and show other employees that it's okay. And it's something quite close to my heart. That is one area where I feel less privileged. So it's something that I think is really important because, speaking about issues really is important, and also education. And knowledge, because again, it's an area that's really quite taboo, and there's a lot of sort of difficult concepts in there as well. So it's also really important to explain what that means and how it affects a person.
Yeah, thank you. And both of those things around the domestic abuse and also the mental health, they're so layered. And that's exactly what you just described there around the nuances and just understanding where is all the grey, nothing is black and white. And I think by having those safe spaces where you're talking about topics that are still taboo, weirdly are still taboo. And there are some personalities in the areas who might come out, like when you look on LinkedIn, there's usually good spokespeople and good allies, but actually the average person won't necessarily feel comfortable or safe. And I think we should always be trying to get out to the average, the ordinary, the normal person who doesn't necessarily know that something's affecting them or don't know where to go. So thank you so much for sharing those. Okay, so Iain, I'd like to come to you now. What advice would you have for our listeners, whether it's being on the allyship journey or with inclusion, just any of the topics that we've discussed today? What advice would you give people?
So I'm a little bit allergic to giving advice. So it turns out that this is based on some real theory. And a chap 60 years ago called Jack Brehm, BREHM, came up with this theory of reactance, which I think really resonates with me, that if we give people advice, that they have what he describes as a strong motivation to secure or restore threatened or lost freedoms. And that seems really interesting to me. So where I give advice, I know people don't want it really, and I know they don't often follow it. We know that there's lots of data that even after major heart surgery, if you get well-being or lifestyle advice from a surgeon, there's like a small chance that you'll follow it. So even in a life and death situation, we don't want it. But there's also this reactance thing. So instead of that, I think it's really important to help people think these things through for themselves. We've already said on this podcast, there's loads of stuff out there. And I feel I can signpost people to that stuff to help them find out more. I think often, though, what I do is I signpost people to someone clever in their world. And what I mean by clever here is more aware and able to communicate that. So someone that they trust so they can ask these questions. Because I find often what gets in the way of people reflecting on their thoughts and their behavior and then therefore being able to change them is that they're actually frightened to have any conversation with anyone. And of course, what we know is all peace processes, all changes come from calm conversation where both parties are prepared to listen to the other. So I think rather than giving advice, I think what we might all consider is how can we signpost people to individuals who they trust, who they can have the right conversations with. So I think that's my answer there, Shireen.
I love that. So for me, that's all based in curiosity. It's being curious enough to find people who can answer those questions and actually acknowledging that we, although we might want somebody to be in a slightly different space, we're not always the right people to offer that guidance, but we should all be curious to find out who those people are.
And what we say on the LEAD program is build a board around yourself of people who know stuff that you don't, who are better than you at stuff. And it could be marketing, it could be finance, it could be comms, but this is a really rich topic. If you are like me, have 4 or 5 people that you can just flick a WhatsApp message to and say, I've just heard this. Is this okay? And we can learn a bit at a time from the expertise that is so closely reachable for us. So really not a huge effort. And of course, what I also find is if you ask for advice from people, not only are they helpful and kind and supportive and you learn new stuff, but it really builds that relationship as well. So this is a win on many levels.
I love that. Thank you. I think that's a great space to absolutely encourage our listeners to be curious, get the right people around you in order to enable your lifelong learning. Thank you so much to Iain, to Joanna and to Laura.
Hello, I'm Sonia Byers, Chief Exec of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. I'm proud of the work we're doing together to create a safe space for different women working in transport to share their stories. You can find details on how to join the conversation in the episode show notes.
Welcome to Mel Clarke, who's Health, Safety, Wellbeing Director for National Highways. She sits on our advisory board, has been on podcast episodes before, and just is an all-round champion for everything that we do. So Mel, over to you on around what National Inclusion Week means for you, and tell us a little bit around your role and what you do to really champion EDI in your organisation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I've been working in National Highways for nearly 20 years now. I've had a variety of different roles, but for my sins, I'm now the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Director for National Highways. But I've had a really long interest in equality, diversity and inclusion in the organisation. So I set up the Leading Women's Network, which is our women's network here at National Highways. It's now called Connecting Women, back in 2014. And that's really where my sort of EDI journey started with National Highways. I recognised I'd had a few challenges working in National Highways as a woman and kind of wanted to share those and kind of bring the organisation to a place where it could support me and other women like me more effectively working in the organisation. And as a consequence of that, of course, I got involved in lots of other employee networks and helped the organisation set our public sector equality duty objectives, particularly around customer and communities, because I was the customer service director for a while. And I sat on the EDI executive subgroup as well. So really supporting the organisation on its journey to equality, diversity and inclusion in National Highways.
Wow, that's loads then, Mel. And you've described it as a journey. And I think some of that probably came from your own lived experience of having worked in the sector. So just describe some of that for me, please.
As I said, I've worked in the sector for 20 years. And one of the challenges in road sector and indeed in national highways is the gender is a little bit imbalanced. So we have a lower representation of female colleagues, particularly in more senior grades in national highways. So I'd joined as an operations manager, felt that it was really hard to get traction, to get progression to the next level for me in national highways. And that was one of the things that I kind of wanted to challenge into the organisation. Well, why is this so challenging? What my experiences had been as a mother, I'd got 3 children, and actually how that sort of almost motherhood penalty, I think we think of it nowadays, was sort of playing into the challenges I was having around making progression with my career. So that kind of really started, that was the awakening for me. Actually, I need to support the organisation in helping remove some of these barriers. But actually, it was just me having the ability to learn as well about barriers that others in the organisation were experiencing, and actually how do we start great conversations about that and acknowledge that, and then actually start to challenge our organisations to remove some of those potential barriers through changing policies and standards and the way that we do things, but also creating a culture where inclusion matters and people can feel that they're part of that organisation and can bring their best selves to work.
Yeah, thank you, Belle. And in that, you described some of the real kind of tangible and actionable steps that you've taken in order to create change. How have you taken people on the journey with you who might not in those, 20 years ago, might not have actually seen the need and the benefit to really align themselves with the EDI agenda? How did you take them on that journey?
I think it's ultimately showing the business benefits to doing it and actually what you get from teams that deliver in an inclusive way. So a huge part of setting up a network is kind of really being able to set out the business case, the business justification for doing it, as well as the moral justification for doing it. You start with the numbers, don't you? Look, actually, we've got public sector equality duties. There's an expectation that we are going to be an inclusive and diverse organisation, and yet our numbers show us something different. So our representation shows us something different, or a lack of declaration around people shows us something different as well. So people are either they're simply not here, the diversity isn't here, or if it is here, they're not telling us about it. And actually compelling the organisation through that evidence to say you have something that you need to do in order to meet the targets that you've set for yourselves in terms of bringing this organisation on. So we definitely start with that, and then we talk about actually the benefits of then filling those gaps and how you go about filling them, whether that's flexible working policies, and extending those, access to jobs for people on part-time or job sharing basis, expectations around support and additional care for people going through the menopause. There's a variety of things that we brought international highways, or we've evolved international highways policies and people standards that's been sold on the back of. But actually, if you want to create this workforce, this diverse workforce, you want the outputs that you get from a diversity of thinking in the organisation. So more creativity, more productivity, better solutions for problems that face our customers, because our road users are diverse, and we want an accessible and inclusive network. Then you have to have people in your workforce that represent that, and these are the things that are getting in the way. So this is the business case for resolving those things and putting those policies in place.
What advice would you give to organisations or individuals really looking to improve not only their own knowledge around EDI, but actually to make sure their organisation is doing what they say that they will do?
My advice is to take it in small steps, and not to try and kind of get paralysed by the fact that there's always a lot to do in this space. And so, we use the word journey. I know that's probably becoming a bit kind of cliched, isn't it, that we're going on a journey, but it genuinely is. So let's not kind of paralyse organisations with kind of the fear of there's just so much to do here. And some of this it starts with a conversation. I always say this. So actually creating the environment within your organisations for those conversations to flourish, and do that in a sensitive manner. So networks are really important because it's a safe space for people to come together that have similar experiences, and then they can really start to safely explore what would make it better within the organisation, And then actually those communities will have similars. So there'll be quite a lot of, intersectionality across those communities where actually you're speaking with a larger voice about the same issues because it affects a number of different groups. And that starts to build some of the momentum. Then the organisation can sit down and say, actually, what do we prioritise in terms of the ask out of here? There will be solutions that fit many asks. And that's the whole point about having these conversations. Actually, what is the challenge here? Well, actually, flexible working can be for people who are parents, but it can also be for people who are carers. It can be for people who are struggling with symptoms of menopause. So actually, well, then you suddenly realise actually one policy decision around something around the flexibility of working arrangements actually can resolve a lot of issues around inclusion for lots of different groups for lots of different reasons. So that's the important bit, is actually getting that conversation underway and then stepping back from that and saying, actually, what's the solutions that will address many of these issues that we find ourselves we find people are experiencing. So we do a bit of that. Respect at work policies are really important. So actually really being able to speak in a language in your respect at work policies about what good or bad looks like. And you can only do that if you ask people how they feel about their experiences in your organisation. So actually you end up with a respect at work policy or a dignity at work policy, whatever your organisation calls it, that's got real language in it that people can kind of point to and say, yeah, actually that's how it manifests when I'm not being included, when I feel excluded or I feel I'm not being treated in the right way because of grounds of sex or race or whatever it is. The company's able to kind of describe what those behaviours look like and what we expect to see and what we don't expect to see in the organisation as well, which is really important.
Yeah, I love that idea around dignity and work, and when you said about the one size catches many, I do think it's a really nice way to just first of all see what can help most people, and then really have that bespoke, personal approach to everyone else, because everyone deserves to have that dignity at work. I think flexible working, as you say, really does answer a lot of the questions that we're having, and it's allowing people to own their time and own their energy and own kind of where they work and how they work. And there are some kind of factors around what that looks like for frontline workers, etc. But actually, most people can work flexibly, and it's about enabling that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm very fortunate to work in National Highways. So we've recently launched our hybrid working policy. So there's an expectation that people will spend time in offices a couple of 3 days a week. That's reasonable. Team working is so important. Actually, if you want to promote inclusion and diversity, we need to come together as teams and we need to orbit each other's spaces in real life.
Yeah.
But equally, that flexibility for people to be able to manage around that expectation, to balance caring needs or health issues, whatever demands are that requires that flexibility, has made a massive difference. So the pandemic was an awful time, but actually we kind of came out of it with a bit of a golden egg, didn't we, when it comes to that ability to recognise that we can work differently, and we can work as teams differently. And that's made a massive difference. I'm absolutely certain that has and will continue to pay dividends around who gets opportunity, because actually we can manage in such a different way.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that was a genuine once a lifetime opportunity to create some positive, lasting change that enables most people just to have the opportunity to thrive. And I don't think those things come about often. And you'd hope, pandemics don't come about often. But I think if you take about the lessons and the value from it, I think it was a real good thing. I think the organisations which are not mandating, things that offer the opportunity to thrive, I think they'll very soon see retention, and we're seeing that already, actually, not even soon, but we're already seeing retention rate change for organisations, and those that want to keep the right people, keep people thriving, are the ones that adapt to those needs. So Mel, thank you so much for your insights on this topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our other guests as well today, so thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Shireen.
And now I'm joined by Hira Ali, Jo Foxall, and with Natalia Martins, who all have different relationships to women in transport. So Hira, I'll start with you. Please introduce yourself, but tell us about really why you champion EDI within all the work that you do.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am an executive coach, a leadership development specialist, and founder of Advancing Your Potential, where we champion allyship programs and inclusive talent management initiatives. I'm also the author of 2 books, Her Way to the Top and Her Allies. Why is this important for me? Well, because being an Asian brown Muslim immigrant woman, I tick a lot of boxes. And I feel that, somebody has to give a voice to the underrepresented communities around us. And I'll be honest, I did not want to be that voice because I didn't want to be seen as that, typical Asian brown Muslim women speaking for specific things. But I think with time, I realized if not me, then who else? So I now am very passionate about this.
Thank you. And I love the idea of, as you said, you didn't really want to be that voice, but just being the role model that maybe you didn't have. And I have to say, anyone who hasn't read your books, they're so easy to read, easy to understand, really easy to action. And I think that's really important when we talk about these topics is actually what role can I play? So I urge everyone to kind of pick up any of your books to really kind of learn how to be the best allies that we can. So Jo, I'll come to you. Tell us about yourself.
So I'm Jo Foxall. I'm the Customer Experience Director at Transport for Wales. And I suppose in terms of the day job, it's not about ED&I. That's not what I do. However, I think it's all about what we all do. And I think, Transport for Wales are really progressive in this space. And I'm a passionate supporter of all of the activity that we do, and particularly passionate about encouraging more women into transport, because I think it's such an important thing to get diversity as we're designing our networks to ensure that they are accessible to all. And that's how I became involved with Women in Transport. And I am the Wales lead for the Welsh Regional Hub of Women in Transport.
Amazing. You do such great work, and I've really loved whenever I've had the chance to join you in Wales and all the events that you do. So I definitely recommend everyone check out the website to see events that are happening in there. And I really loved the net walking where people meet up together, and what a great way to take people outside to have those conversations. So really great stuff. And Natalia, tell us about yourself and the work that you do and how you support EDI.
So I'm Natalia Martins, my pronouns are she, her, and where my intersectionality sits is that I'm highly educated white Latin American woman that lives in the UK, and I'm quite aware of some privileges, but also the obstacles that comes with that. I'm a geographer and I work in tech. I'm interested in all things data sets, transport, keen on innovation solutions to enable the greater good for society and the planet. I'm currently volunteering for Women in Transport as a project manager, supporting the intersectionality work streams led by the amazing host, Shireen. And I'm also a Mentee engagement lead for our advanced program. I volunteer also for UN Women UK and my local WI Women's Institute. If we consider I'm an EDI champion, and I try to bring the EDI element lenses on all projects and decisions that we make in the space. And by doing that, it's being curious, empathetic, flexible, and trying to adapt to others' needs and raising the awareness of those different lived experiences, but also in understanding the challenges that they might face. And also is bringing the representation and the inclusivity in safe environments and safe spaces. So yeah, trying my best as being an ally.
Oh, wonderful. And Natalia does such great work. And I really like how you described it around kind of really amplifying those lived experiences and those voices. And I think that really nicely takes me on to my next question around what are some of the current initiatives and current things that you're doing either to support clients or whether it's internally. And for this one, I'll come to Jo first. What is it you're perhaps doing? I know you said that actually EDI isn't part of your day job, which is good. It shouldn't be part of anyone's day job. It should be just part of the approach that we have, right? So tell me about some of the stuff that you do.
Transport for Wales has actually got a fantastic ED&I community. We've got a really good team, that we have loads of volunteers and people that are thinking about all of these things all of the time, and our internal kind of message boards are alive with kind of notes about different events and initiatives to encourage people to get involved. I think one of the most recent and one of the most groundbreaking things that we have done is our Period Dignity project. So we've worked with an organisation called Totem, have rolled out period products across all of our estates, and are really passionate about that period dignity piece and making products available to all of our workforce, regardless of gender. We recognise that obviously the trans community obviously need to access this, but also we all have mums, sisters, daughters, friends who might need this as well. So we encourage people to take the products when they need them. So I think that's a huge step forward for us as an organisation, and really, really proud of that work.
Lovely. That's really strong to hear. And it's really interesting because we do have conversations about periods now that we might not have had before. But in some respects, we're still not as advanced as we should be. It's really interesting because these are quite normal biological things that happen, but they're still quite taboo. But it's really interesting to and wonderful actually to hear the work that you're doing just to, as you describe it, around dignity, but just having accessibility to products at times when you might not for various different reasons.
Yeah.
So I really love that. Thank you. Hira, I'll come to you now. What advice, guidance do you give to clients, or maybe you've done yourself? Tell me a bit more about that.
So I think one of the key initiatives that we've been focusing on within the leadership programs that we run for women and people from global majority for different organizations is a focus on sponsorship, allocating senior sponsors to participants that are undergoing development programs, because it's a well-known fact, right, that people from underrepresented communities are over-mentored but under-sponsored. And we know that confidence training and fixing people alone is not going to cut it. And sponsors have played such a critical role in unlocking talent and providing that access to opportunities like never before. And this, I feel, has made such a significant difference to our participants in the programs that they do participate in. And the other thing, of course, as you know, I'm an advocate, passionate advocate of allyship programs, but not just any allyship programs with a focus on intersectionality and cultural intelligence. And I think those programs are really taking off very well. And people are able to see allyship as a collective responsibility rather than just something which is the sole responsibility of HR or EDI. So I would say these two things. Then, of course, I also run an organization which is a social enterprise called the Grey Area with Sharon. And through that organization, we do a lot of surveys. And through surveys, we find out exactly what is it that people want and what is holding them back, what could help them, because we feel that it's important to survey people and communities that you want to help rather than making assumptions and imposing interventions without really taking into consideration what exactly is it that they're looking for.
Yeah, I love that. And Hira, you sit, for our listeners' benefit, you sit on our advisory group for intersectionality, really kind of helping along with our other advisors just to understand the directions that we take as women in transport into that. And really interesting to hear about your work in the data space and really like promoting allyship. But I do find that people think that it's a special person that has to be an ally, and actually we're all special in that sense. We can all be allies to one another in various different degrees. And I couldn't agree more. Women are over mentored and under championed, and you take yourself into that space of activism and activization rather than thinking, well, I'll just mentor you, because actually we all have something to learn. We should all be mentoring each other as we go. But how do we get into that active space to really support people to, actualize their own inspirations and life dreams? Natalia, from your perspective, I know you've done loads of work with the UN and also with Women in Transport, working across through a few of our work streams. What else do you do to kind of really promote intersectionality and inclusion?
I think with the intersectionality piece of work that we do for Women in Transport, now it comes from acknowledging the importance and the need to support the different lived experiences. So it's a thing like understanding that people have different experiences and that not always one solution fits for all. So there's this kind of a piece of importance. It's like championing this EGI with an educational and awareness purpose. So like we do campaigns and events, podcasts is one of them. There's roundtables, book club is another element that we do, and workshops. So I think in this, particularly with the podcast project, we are creating this space where people from voices that are not usually the mainstream ones, they have this space to share, a safe space to share their stories and promote those lived experiences and being role models, because I think we sometimes miss that. We miss that being able to access those role models. They are not mainstreams. And I think another initiative that we did was when collaborating with a podcast producer, because we are an organization that empowers women. We wanted also to engage and collaborate with a male-led podcast producer based in the UK. So hi, Emily here. Have a great work. I think on a personal and professional note as well is about bringing the conversations. It's talking to people at work, with a family, with friends, and bringing them along in this journey and awareness of those EGI topics and their importance and how positively we impact. It's also about like implementing their learning. So like we learn new things and we try to implement in our daily actions, and through that, hopefully you are inspiring others positively.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that approach. And I think from my perspective, it's really around creating those safe spaces where we can have these conversations, because some of them are still taboo, or people might feel judged in just coming and talking about some of their life experiences. And my kind of mantra is, you don't know what you don't know. And the more we can speak to people and understand what their journeys have been, the more we might reflect on ourselves, or to be able to show a bit of compassion to other people and say, I totally know why you reacted in that way now. It's because actually you're going through this, or whatever it might be. And it's a real privilege to do the podcast and all the other activities that we do, because the more that I speak to people, the more that I understand there are some common themes around just stuff that human beings want in order to thrive. But also the journeys that we go on are so different, and there's no way that you could live another person's life, but by showing curiosity and just saying, tell me about yourself. I get to hear like the most amazing stories. And I think these are things that really help me to be the leader that I can be, which is by creating those safe spaces for other people to be themselves. Okay, so moving on to the space around maybe some success stories, maybe some initiatives that you've seen have worked really well. This is an opportunity now for all of us to kind of comment on these. I'm going to come to Natalia now. Any successes that you've seen, and this could be other volunteer work that you've done as well, but what successes might you relay to our listeners?
Yeah, I think I will bring it to an element that involves us in all layers, so not specifically on one single project, but like something that we can act upon, is the importance, the impact that language has and has on our own psyche and then society as well, because language can unconsciously say you are invisible or reassure a privileged group. So it's like that is, some people don't see that, but I think there is a lot into language that we can change, and with that change, empower people through language. So it's like, I think the actions that can impact positively and as intentionally using gender neutral language instead of the gendered ones. So for example, you're saying about policemen, you use police officer. So it's like fireman, you use a firefighter. But then things as simple as, rather than you refer to a wide group as, hey guys, you swap this for like a hey team, or folks or people, whichever is the appropriate or that word that you like to use most, but like it's like swapping those gendered names. And that is the other example on gender neutral pronouns, is like it's just acknowledging that some people do not fit in the binary norm, and that they are as visible as those ones that do sit. And also not assuming people's pronoun because of like their names. So like, I know that like some known as common names that would be read as female or male, and people would naturally assume which are their pronouns. So I think that is the importance of like asking for their pronouns and not assuming to start. And if you don't know, using the neutral one, because it's the way that you kind of acknowledging that. And the importance of like, you can also do things like, change your tag names and acknowledging your own pronouns. And these hopefully would create an environment that is safe and people could feel comfortable to come out and be able to share their own, even if their own is not what I consider the norm. So yeah, I think as this about of these examples, they are like, the EDI initiatives and education pieces, they are transferable to our daily life. And the impact that can have is really great, because you're like challenging biases, but also challenging behaviors, but also inviting people to those conversations and to that change that will impact their own communities as well, not only in the working space.
That's brilliant. And I think you're right around creating those small things that you can do that have really huge impacts on people, but they're actually really easy things. We can all do that. We can all talk about our pronouns. We can all use inclusive language. Yes, it might be a bit of a shift for some people, but actually we can all do it. But the impact on those things is huge, and they're really lasting, and it does create inclusion. And I like what you said around just those safe spaces. And we do that just with how we treat people, and just the energy that we give off. People can very much feel that that's a person I can go to. I know when we did the episode in season 1 for Pride, and speaking to some colleagues in the sector there, and somebody mentioned around putting your pronouns on your email signature, and just what a little act, what it does, it tells, this is what the person said, it just tells me that that's a safe person, that's someone that I can go to. And I thought, I just do that anyway, but how great that someone can look at that and say, Shireen's all right, we can have a chat with her. And I didn't realize actually what a huge impact something as small as that would have, and it's totally actionable. I think we can all absolutely do that. Hira, I'll come to you. What advice would you give people, and what successes would you share?
So I love Natalia's advice. I think it's amazing because it's something which I write in her allies too, Shireen. If you've read the book, you
I
must
have.
have seen this. It's such a simple step, but it's a step which is often overlooked. So love that. But I think in terms of impact and successes, I have particularly a male allyship program in mind, which I launched in a public sector organization, which unfortunately did not gain a lot of traction. But when they made a change, and that really transformed how people started looking at it. What was the change? They started rolling it down from the top leadership. And when the senior leaders were involved, when they started leveraging strong connections and visible supporters in the higher ranks to roll out the program, it significantly bolstered the credibility and impact of the program, and it gave it the momentum it needed. So that was one of the things which made a difference to the allyship program that I launched. Then it was also that they were only doing sort of one-off solutions rather than sustained long-term plans. And when they started providing these solutions as a continuous coaching support, because allyship is hard, right? It can be isolating. So if you're not offering continuous support, right, and if you're just offering short-lived interventions, then that doesn't yield results. So that change also significantly impacted the success of the program. And the last thing which made a difference was accountability and a clear link between key performance indicators and the initiative, because people started taking it seriously. Because if you do not have a robust system to measure and evaluate progress, it becomes very hard for the goals and objectives for any initiative to be achieved, let alone the EDI initiative. So I think those were the things that really helped. But in terms of advice, I would definitely say that a lot of organizations are very well intentioned. They do want to do well, but sometimes they do not have proper planning and intervention in place, and they do not lay the groundwork necessary for having these difficult conversations. So what this means is that when you have EDI initiatives in the organizations, people commit to it, but there's no sort of genuine commitment, and you risk securing just a sort of tacit agreement, a mere lip service, and people will commit to it without understanding the barriers to equality, diversity, inclusion. So it's really, really important before launching an initiative, you need to have you need to gauge readiness, you need to have listening sessions, you need to understand what the reservations are so you're able to tackle it properly. And then also, again, what is equally important is to champion a culture where mistakes are not excessively penalized, because psychological safety is important. We established that in the beginning of the session, but that of course doesn't mean tolerating any forms of bias or phobia, but it is important also to make sure that if people make mistakes, you allow those mistakes to happen, because otherwise, people will always be too afraid to embrace the journey. And I think when especially senior leaders are vulnerable and they're able to share their lessons and they create an environment of transparency, then there is a trickle-down effect, and people are able to, actively learn from mistakes and build a culture that values improvement and openness.
What a well-rounded answer. I think there's loads of really tangible things that we can take in there. I really liked when you spoke about just laying that groundwork. So don't just throw an initiative out there without actually speaking to people, seeing where they're at. What are the barriers? What are those gaps? And definitely around making things actually just sustainable from the offset, and have some measurement on it. What gets measured gets done, but also definitely, you're right, it makes people to pay attention to these things because you're actually taking it seriously. And to Jo, I'll come to you. What advice would you give to people?
I think it's about education and celebration. And I think, we're all constantly on a learning journey, and don't be afraid to get it wrong, because you probably will get it wrong, but learn. And once you know better, then you can do better. And I think that's really important. It's like, don't be afraid to get involved because you think you might get it wrong. We do quite a lot around that education piece, particularly in Transport for Wales. So our big celebration for Windrush Cymru, Windrush 75, we had a big screening in the office, and it was a really insightful and moving piece of filming that was really educational and really helped us understand. We have a big Windrush community in Wales, and particularly on the railway. We have a lot of people actually within our organisation who are related to people from that generation, and it's really, really interesting topic. And learn, understand, and celebrate those things. And then, back to that celebration piece, it's encouraging people to be able to bring their full self to work, and So we recently took part in Pink Portraits programme, is an LGBTQ I kind of film celebration. And we won the Iris Prize because we had a load of photographs of our LGBTQ community from Transport for Wales, photographed in the most beautiful photographs that were displayed within Cardiff Central. And, you know, it's about those members of the team being confident to bring that full self to that workplace and to be so open about it. And so we can learn more from them. And, you know, that has worked incredibly well. But yeah, I think it's so much about that education, because we're all learning all the time, aren't we? You know, and things are changing, and people are being more honest and more open about how things make them feel. And so, yeah, it's not being afraid to get it wrong as long as you're learning.
I love that. Thank you. Really, really great suggestions and really great experiences. Natalia, Jo and Hira, thank you very much for your time. And I'll join everyone else on the next episode of the Women in Transport podcast.